Hello world, welcome to the SCPS Citizens Advisory Council meeting for this day of February 6th, 2023. We're called to order. Public comment? I've seen none. We're going to move on to the next action item. Approval of January 2023 minutes. Oh, good to see you. No, you're worried. You're fine. So approval of the minutes. So, make a motion for that. You guys are voting members. You guys do it.
We need a quorum for that.
No, we actually, our bylaws say we just have to have a supporting majority, meaning majority.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor of approving this in January?
Aye.
Yes, unanimous vote. Wonderful. We can start off with our work session then. Ms. Cannon has joined us. Thank you, Ms. Cannon, for being here. Great to see you. And yes,
So based on that, you said that a simple majority is required for that.
for yes.
Do we have an actual roster, an updated roster?
We're actually going to get to that. It's actually only the
Okay.
for today. It's the bylaws. We have to get to that. If not, it'll be put for next meeting. Yes, we do have a roster. Yes, we do have that. Yes. Ms. Cannon, take it away.
Okay. I'm Jamie Cannon. I'm Chief Legal Counsel with Frederick County Public Schools, and I was asked to come just chat with you a little bit about policy and reg because I understand there might be some interest in having this group maybe assist or help us update some of our policies that we're in the process of doing. So I'm going to give you a little information about what I serve as the liaison to the board's policy committee, and then I also serve as the chair of the regulation committee. And of course, it all starts with the law, so that's why it's typically under the lawyer's hat. So this was something that I did with the Racial Equity Committee. The Racial Equity Committee is also a board-appointed committee that is really giving great input and helped us with policy development. So I'm going to kind of give the same type of presentation, but then maybe focus a little bit more on maybe if this group or this committee also wants to give input or help with updating and revising some of our policies. And I will share with you that the original Citizens Advisory Council recommended the format that we use now, and we've used it ever since. And that happened about 5 years ago at the origin of this committee. So it makes perfect sense. We're coming full circle on the topic. So I have just a folder, and I have a really brief PowerPoint on this topic.
Thank you.
So if you want to just take out a copy of the PowerPoint, and then I gave you a sample policy and a sample regulation. And then take that for me. So I'm going to give you pre-test, okay? Now don't jump ahead because the answers are in the back. But if you had to think about, is this a P or an R? Just basic knowledge. You're not going to turn it in. It's not going to be graded. But how would you answer these questions? Would you say, oh yeah, that's a policy, or yeah, that feels like it would be a regulation? Just based on knowing a little bit, nothing, or a whole bunch. Go ahead and take a couple minutes to fill that out. Do you need a pen?
Yes.
There you go.
Nothing like to grab some. Thanks.
No problem. Anybody else need one? Good. All right.
It's kind of easy.
What?
Just a little bit.
But sometimes even the best board members have to be reminded.
Oh,
Stay in your lane.
Oh, absolutely.
All right, we'll go to the next slide. So policy development is a cooperative effort. It involves the Board of Ed. And it's a function of the board, and its implementation of it is the role of the superintendent. And this really starts out in Maryland law. I could show you the annotated code that says the bylaws and operation of the school system is developed by the board, and then the regulations to implement that. But neither of those can conflict with the law. So the board, I always say kind of the policy making and the regulation is kind of our law of the land as staff. What is the board expecting of us relative to, we're going to get into social media behaviors. I think that's a really good topic, and it kind of touches students and staff, and it's a relatively new one that we developed. So yes, if you answer some of those questions that the board kind of sets the how, and then the superintendent and staff have to then implement that, but it can never conflict. It can't conflict with the law, the reg can't conflict with the policy, and the practice certainly can't conflict. And when they do, we will sometimes guide employees in a letter of corrective action that your actions conflicted with the expectations of Board Policy 117. So they are true governing principles and philosophies and expectations of the board. Okay. Yeah. So I want to give you some examples. So you'll see in your packet Board Policy 115, and this was a really important, we developed this a couple of years ago, and the board very much wanted to establish what does good digital citizenship look like, because staff have to model this for students, because we were seeing a lot of misbehavior, and this can be very quickly disruptive in a school environment and in an educational environment. So the board knew that they wanted to develop some guiding principles in this policy. So just take a peek at the policy. And so you're going to see some themes. And when I say purpose, we have definitions, we have a policy statement. That format came as a result of the Citizens Advisory Committee. It's the first body of work that they provided. So you'll see that it really gives that general guideline, the expectation about what the board expects of staff and students on this topic. And then if you flip over to the other side, you'll see then what does compliance look like? Then you'll look at Regulation 100-08. So you'll have the policy committee develop the policy, take it to the full board, then the superintendent will be directed to issue regulation. So when you look at this regulation, it really gets into the detail. What's a social media account? What's an organizational use of social media? What about your personal Facebook page, your Instagram? Do we have any authority over that? Well, we do tell you that you shouldn't use that to ever communicate student-related information. You should keep those accounts separate. And this was an area where employees were getting into some disciplinary infractions because you had a whole host of employees that were hired that very much this was their everyday world. You know, we kind of call that the millennial or Gen Y world, that it's just very comfortable. But a new teacher coming in to a public employer in a public sector, you have parents very much looking at social media. We have students having crushes on, you know, employees. I want to find out who you are. So we really felt like, and we're going to talk about where do you start with a policy? Well, what's trending? What's a problem? What guidance do our employees need to help them? And then two, we wanted and knew that we needed to give some guiding modeling principles to our students. So you'll see that the regulation, and the regulation is usually about 3 more pages than the policy, depending on, you know, the topic. But this was one that we spent a lot of time that we wanted to make sure employees had this. So in new employee orientation, this is one that we reference a lot because they'll say, can I have my own Twitter account? How do I have that? Who owns that Twitter account? Does your employer own that? Can I have a personal one? So this is an area very much that when I came to work here as an attorney, it wasn't a big topic, but it evolved into a very big topic. And it has really been a great reference point and good guiding principles because our board told us these are things we expect from our employees. Now go write a regulation, do training, and then make sure our employees have that in their hands. So that would be what I would say is a very good example of policy to reg. Do you have any questions on that? All right, keep moving right along. So differentiating between policy, regulation, and exhibits. So you'll see that we have a lot of policies and sometimes they'll have exhibits or fillable forms. Bullying comes to mind. The board very much wanted the bullying policy, the bullying reg, to make sure that it was very easy if someone wanted to report that. They were the same way on the anti-racism policy 117 that they just developed. So it was our student board member that says, yeah, we don't really fill out forms. And we say, well, what do you look for? What do you think they said? Any guesses?
Well, normally it would be a social media link or some type of,
Bit warm?
I mean, a Snapchat account or something, an Instagram account.
Okay, you're thinking like a student, yeah. Something easy and accessible, and I can do it from my phone. Pardon me?
Text it.
Like a QR code?
A QR code. So the student board member said, so you'll see now that our policies and regs, especially ones that for easy reporting, is it easy accessible? Can I do it from my phone? Can I text it? Can I hold my camera phone up? So that is something that has evolved, and the student board member is the one, we were like, oh, we can do this in a Google Doc and fill up a form. And so, and Mr. J, I think it was you looked at the board member or the student board member and said, how will this make it easy? Remove the barriers to reporting, especially on those kind, because there's nothing more frustrating if it's not a fillable form or it's easy and I should report it, because it's not easy to report. You think it is, but you'll see a student or a staff member really struggle on should I, shouldn't I? So when we very much, and the board very much wanted us to encourage it and remove any barriers, because it was something that they were getting a lot of feedback, and they wanted to show that they were very responsive and that it was very easy to record and get that process going. So that would be an example. So the board set that clear expectation in policy, so any reg that we developed had to be aligned with that expectation, remove the barriers, easy access, and then in the exhibits, because the board said, what if somebody doesn't have a phone? I want the fillable form, I want the paper copy at the school, and I want the QR code. So that's why you might say, well, Jamie, there's still like the old fillable form or something that's paper copies in the school. That was part of the board's intent, to give multiple ways of people that maybe not have the technology or know how to use that. All right. So I always say these are kind of the top 10. So you as a group might look to current regs or current policies and give feedback. Or you might say, does the board, or should the board consider a new policy? So when I met with the Racial Equity Committee, I always say, we first say, do we understand the problem or the issue? And I talked a little bit about the social media. That evolved into something we knew we needed. Just recently, like I said, the board felt very strongly about an anti-racism policy. So they were identifying a problem and they knew they wanted to create that. So when we look at writing policy or reg, we know that it is going to be very significant and it sets a very high expectation. Has the issue been researched? Do they look at alternatives? So when this group came up with the format, this group researched 5 different counties and came up with the format in Howard County that they thought really, they liked the structure and the format. So we now replicated that. But that was a result of this group. And with any policy that I develop, like with the anti-racism policy, I know that the board is first going to say, have you researched nationwide policies in surrounding counties? Has the issue been addressed in the past? Does the policy reflect current practice and the law? So that's why you'll see in a format that I'm going to show you, we now have a section that we cite any section to the COMAR or the annotated code or the federal code. Short-term and long-term effects of the policy. And I will tell you that the board, probably spent 8 months on the anti-racism policy, as well as the one on creating a welcoming environment for transgender and gender, non-gender students, creating welcoming environment for transgender and gender non-conforming students. And I know that because oftentimes there's a lot of dialogue about what's the right title as people are searching on this title. And they spend a lot of time on, should it be a racism policy, anti-racism policy? There was a lot of dialogue around that. And what did those words mean? So sometimes you can write a 9-page policy, and we got down to 3 board meetings, and it took them a couple meetings to come up with consensus, because titles are very, very important. So we always just say, what are the short-term and long-term effects? And is it consistent with the vision and mission? So sometimes we'll come up and we'll say this social media policy supports board goal 4 about hiring responsible, good role models for students. So anytime you are looking at policy development, does it align with the mission and vision and goals of the board? Are there any budget ramifications? And so we often look at if the QR code, do we have to buy new software? Are there any budgetary implications of saying thou shalt now go do this? Do we need somebody? We actually hired somebody after the social media regulation to give guidance on how to set up Twitter accounts and also to monitor our social media accounts to make sure we're removing things that are derogatory or profane, because people like to get cute on your website. So that triggered a new staff position, because that was a very big body of work and expectation of the board. And always, what do you want to accomplish? And do you know the why? Because sometimes there'll be, I saw a county have a very knee-jerk reaction. I'm going to pass this policy because people were bringing signs to a board meeting. Well, we'll stop that. And I think somebody got hit in the head with a sign in the board meeting. And the county said, well, we'll just fix this right now. We're passing the policy, no signs. No signs in the board room when you come for public comment. And so the why, short and long-term effects, any legal ramifications, because you have a First Amendment right to maybe bring a sign. You can't be disruptive with your sign. So did it go too far, too fast without thinking of all those things as it relates to that? So I always just say, if you're a knee-jerk reaction because something happened, pause, because you're about ready to pass a policy very haphazardly when there's a lot that goes into this. Any questions on that? All right. So these are just what I'd say the cautions. You want to be careful not to blur the lines between policy and reg, and that's why we did the little pre-test, and we'll do the post-test. It's the how, but not the why, and it's the how and the why. It's the why relative to that, but then what are the nuts and bolts as far as executing that? There are some anomalies, because you might say, well, Jamie, your policy 440 on charter schools has everything in it, or the one on tobacco and alcohol use. Sometimes the law will say, and the board shall pass a policy that says this. So there's some anomalies where you don't see this real detailed regulation. Political activity is what the board sets, and that is all policy. There's no regulation. Charter schools and this one, there's not a lot. So you might say, well, hey, this doesn't make sense. This wouldn't fit Jamie's pre and post test. And usually that's because it's governed by law, that the law says it has to be, all this language has to be in a board policy. We always communicate changes to stakeholders. And I said, resist the temptation of reactive policy making, based on that emotion or that isolated circumstance. That usually comes back to haunt us a little bit.
Could you remember that, sorry, example presented for when the lines were blurred? Is there, what policy you mentioned that has like charter schools or the other one?
So the ones where everything that's in the policy, Mr. J, is policy 112, the drug-free, alcohol-free, and tobacco-free workplace. By federal law, it says that the board has to have all that language in there, charter school, and by choice, the political activity. The board said we want all of that to be very crystal clear in our policy to everyone, because there's a lot of different stakeholders. Yeah, no problem. Okay. So this is the format. If you get into looking at some policies that, Dr. Marco may identify for you as, your homework or the next time that you meet, you'll see that we have some policies that are in the 500 series that we have not yet put in this format. So as far as we have a couple in that area that there's not a policy statement, a purpose, definitions, content, or legal references, because we started in the 100s, 200s, 300s, 400s, and now we're coming up with a regular policy review. And that one's very curricular based. So 500 is about courses of study. It's about character education. How do we handle evening high school? Well, evening high school is now the blended virtual school. So those are some topics that are ripe for review and for putting in this new format. So that would, I mean, you guys can determine as a committee, where I would say, there certainly would be a need, and you'll see that there's maybe one or two that have been placed in the format. So that's just a suggestion, but these would be the components as you write or review or give input on those. Okay, so here are your answers. So policy does answer the what and the why, but the how and the when is the superintendent. And the how and the when, our sexual harassment policy says there's certain codes of conduct that you will not engage in here. The when is, when do we do the training? What does that training look like? How do we investigate that, et cetera? So that would be an example. So just think the what and the why is policy, the how and the when is regulation. And when you get into the step-by-step, that detail should be in a reg. But sometimes if the board's talking about policy development, and they'll put a lot of detail, sometimes I'll say, well, would that be more appropriate that we put that in a regulation? And I remember when Mr. J first came on the board, it was about our hiring policy and our expectation of the types of qualities and characters.
Yes.
And do you remember the word that you very much, kindness, that who we are professionals, we are experienced. And he said, I really want the word kindness and civility in there. And so that would be the expectation of who we are as an organization. And then how do we go about hiring that individual? So that would be an example. If the board will say, well, from a policy expectation, these words are important to me. And when then it gets into the detail, we'll say, well, let us, work through that in a regulation. But we always have to make sure those regulations are aligned with the board policy. So my office gets a lot of interpretive questions. Can you tell me if I'm reading this policy right? Or what was the board's expectation on? And sometimes I'll go right back to the notes and in the dialogue that we had, because I want to make sure. And sometimes if I'm not sure, I'll go back to the board and say, I think this is how was the intent of how you wanted me to interpret the policy, but I just wanted to check back relative to that. And of course, policies, usually you'll see in a policy and the superintendent is hereby directed to issue regulations to comply and implement the intent of this policy. You'll see that as common language in a lot of our policies. And the superintendent can change reg, waive reg. The board can waive its own policy. And it actually has a policy that probably needs updated they have a policy about waiving policy. Because sometimes schools will come and say, I'd like to do this, but it would require a waiver of the board policy, and they'll come before the board, especially if it's an isolated activity or something that they want to do. And it was funny, we had now exception language in the dress code policy for students because, it said something, along the lines they couldn't wear certain things, but yet they were wearing those things during Spirit Week. So you'll see that the dress code says, unless it's Spirit Week, because they're wearing pajamas, they're wearing hats, they're doing things. And that was through a student input. Hey, are we breaking the dress code policy, but we're allowed to do this during Spirit Week? So I've really had a lot of fun over the years especially when it's led by student input. And of course, the dress code, we always get their input on that one. And so, when it gets into outlining the broad board position, that's policy, the mechanics, the implementation, the detail is the regulation. So how'd you guys do? Pretty well? Mr. J said it was easy. Amanda, thoughts?
Pretty well.
Okay.
That was roughly 300.
Policy 300, that's right. And you'll see that the 300 series usually deal with employees, okay? The 100 series governs the board in general. The 200 is usually about operations, purchasing, procurement. The 300 usually relates to employees. 400's all students. So if somebody's saying, I can't find them, something looks, student discipline or student dress code, 400s. And then the 500 series is usually our curriculum, our courses of study, schools, extracurriculars. And so you'll see that on our website. So there is a method to our madness on those. And again, that was a recommendation of the Citizens Advisory Council when they recommended the format. Now, most counties do have themes relative to their numbering in their series. All right, Mr. J, is that what you wanted me to do tonight?
That was wonderful. So at this time, I'm gonna have the, any questions you may have. This is like, you're getting, board excellence right now. This is like, it's kind of what you, the staff stuff. The question, I recommend you not hold on to it. I'm sure it's a good question.
What is the range of time usually to instruct these items?
So usually when we get into, so the policy committee meets once a month. And if it's a change that you have quick consensus on, it could go to policy committee month 1, go to work session for the full board to talk about it, and then be approved the next month. So I would say the shortest avenue is usually 3 months. The longest I have worked on a policy is 12 months. And that was, and anti-racism, I mean, we probably had 9 months involved in that. 12 months was our creating a welcoming environment for transgender students, because there was a lot of public input, a lot of individuals coming to the board meeting relative to that. So it just depends, you know, and it's funny, you know, we look at different regs or different policies, and we know that when they're on the agenda, we're going to have, you know, a strong reaction. But I would say just in your typical, you know, avenue, it's usually a 3-month cycle.
Is the process for approval for a policy versus a regulation, as far as what's required to approve it, it has to roll, has to roll up to the board anyway?
Just the policy. The regulations are approved by the superintendent at our superintendent's advisory, and that's every other month.
So the regulation approved by the superintendent solo, or is it subject to oversight by somebody else?
No, solo.
Just, okay.
Now,
And
she has an advisory council. We as staff bring changes that we want her to consider. And so she'll take the input, but she can also sit in her office and sign off or waive one if she wants.
Interesting. So the superintendent was in principle not necessarily aligned with the policy that had been handed over. That superintendent really would have a lot of bureaucratic ability to implement and whatever deliberate.
No, because you can never have a regulation that conflicts with policy.
I didn't say conflict. I said like, you know, we'll put this into place at whatever time we think we can get to it. You know? But I was just saying.
Oh, you mean to delay, or I gotcha.
I wouldn't use a terrible word like that, but saying, you know, and a follow-up question, that would be the exhibits. So, okay, this is the exhibit we're going to use to put this regulation in place to serve that policy.
Right.
Ultimately, the exhibit also is at the purview of the superintendent. I would imagine.
Yeah. Now, sometimes when the board is reviewing policy, they'll say, now I know regulation is not my domain, but could we see the regulation as we're talking about revising the policy? So sometimes we'll attach it as information, and they'll view it very much in concert. Like when we passed the policy on teaching controversial topics, we did the policy, then we did the reg, and we wanted to make sure the reg was in line with the board's expectations, because every teacher needs to know what that reg means. So that would be one where we'd say, you know, we took it back to the policy committee. We know you don't need to approve this, but we'd like to talk about it to make sure it is meeting your expectation.
So I guess that was sort of my question was leading. So let's say the policy is put into place by the board and everybody loves it. It's universally, yeah, we need this, blah, 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 whatever. Yeah. And then the superintendent either doesn't do anything or doesn't do it quick enough, or does it in the way that was in line, just principally with the policy when it was originally handed over. If somebody had a grievance, whatever you want to call it, would they bring it to the superintendent, or would they bring it to the board and say, this regulation isn't serving that policy well?
They probably come to public comment. I mean, that if they want to get that information immediately before the board that you have a policy and this regulation doesn't align.
That's how we had in mind, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Can you describe again the process? I mean, I think I understand when you said, and I think I even witnessed it, right? The process for the public to weigh in on policies that are of concern or they disagree with in some way. Can you describe what the process is or what the avenues of engagement are for regulations? You mentioned there's an advisory council Is that an avenue for citizens to engage with, or how does that process play out?
So the policy one is if they have any comment at any time about policy, I just had students send me comments about a certain policy, and they said, we know that you're the liaison to the policy committee. We'd like the policy committee to review these comments. And so I'll put that on the agenda and I'll send it to the policy committee,
Yeah.
and we'll deliberate. So it can be written format to the policy committee. It can be sometimes you show up for public comment. So, and we're seeing more and more people, hey, I can't be there, but can you read my comments into the record? And they do. It's like that, you know, they've been at the meeting. So for the policy committee, both written and verbal, if you want to call it, with any regulation, I've had people say, hey, when you are early dismissal, late arrival due to inclement weather, this is confusing. You know, my office kind of oversees any input relative to regulations. And then I say, as staff, we'll look at that and we might make a recommendation to the superintendent at the Superintendent's Advisory Council. So that's also an avenue that, same way, if people want to email that, then we say, that I'll delegate this to the right staff member. And we recently had one on the student discipline and appeal process. A parent said, hey, this was kind of confusing. I wasn't sure how to file the appeal. And I said, oh, I'll assign that to the staff member. We'll look at that. We ended up making a modification. So that is an ongoing process with any of our regulations. And sometimes too, it's just, a lot of parents will give us title recommendations. Hey, this was hard to find. I searched on this word and it wasn't easy to find. I just wanted to find your reg on if my child needs medicine in school to be administered. And I think we had it under something like allergies, students with allergies instead of medicine administration. So we often will get just quick emails from people saying, I was looking for this and it was hard to find or it didn't make sense. And then we review that and make a recommendation on the regs.
But the legal counsel's office is the place to do that,
Yep.
the primary place on the
Yep.
regs.
Yeah, because I'm the liaison to the policy committee and the superintendent's advisory council.
Who else is on that advisory council?
It's made up of cabinet members, and then we have the Chamber of Commerce, we have the PTA, we have parents on the committee, we have union representation. We have a principal at each level. Mike, can you remember his name?
So community members, principals at each level, then we'll have supervisors come in that are specific to a regulation. For example, if we have an athletic regulation coming in, we'll have Kevin Kendrow, who's the supervisor of athletics. He doesn't typically serve on the committee, but he will come to speak to a new regulation, similar to Janet Shipman, who is our supervisor of school counseling. If there's something specific to her, we'll invite that person in to speak to it. But it's exactly what Mrs. Cannon alluded to. It's community members, Chamber of Commerce representation, PTA representation, some of our community groups, principals at various levels, and we do have directors on it as well.
It's a very large group.
Yes, excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we fill up that when we used to meet in person, now we meet virtually. Anything else? Mr. J, anything else that you wanted me to touch on?
So then I guess the next question would be, for this council, so we went through a list of what concerns we have in the community.
Okay.
So we pull those concerns and we kind of fill them down to our top few concerns. And so stop me if I'm wrong. The action the council wants to take is to take those concerns and the policies that match those concerns and bring those to you for, update
Okay.
and review or tweaking. It's a concern that has been asked, it's not met in the policy, look at it, needs to be added to it, or needs to be updated to say this. And so once we discuss those policies, we see that we do our homework, we look at those, what's our action to say, okay, Ms. Cannon, what is our next step avenue connection to get there?
Well, I would recommend mirroring kind of what your racial equity committee does. And that way they would look at a policy and they would actually say policy, whatever number it is, 2B, would you consider adding this language? Would you consider modifying it? And they would just edit right within the policy. We gave it to them in Word. And then we just brought that document to the policy committee. And some would say yes and some would say no. Just depending on that, but each of them were evaluated and discussed. So if there's ones that you feel as a committee, you have some direct experience or thoughts or recommendations, that would be my recommendation, that you identify that policy, give feedback, send it to me, and I'll, put it on the agenda.
And I can share the form that Racial Equity Committee is using for that.
Wonderful. I also wanted to get that on record. That's the question. You also put a list of everybody in the room who didn't know that. So that's kind of what we're doing. We had our list of like our top hot things. And now it's super good with the policy, and then we're going to put the standard team to get movement of feedback. And again, feedback, no is feedback. So there's that too. There's, oh, you know what? That's great. We'll incorporate that. And when that happens, it goes to the policy committee. We set a policy committee, it goes to the board. And once it gets to the board, if you're strongly about it, I highly advise you to come to the board meetings and speak to the policy. This is before you this evening. I encourage you to add this to the language to the policy. It happens a lot. And then the board looks at it, and then they go back for editing, and they come back. Once it gets before the board, you got a good shot at something happening for it. So I'll say that much. So that's how we can get things going and make changes to the policies. Thank you so very
You're
much.
very
welcome. Thank you.
And like I said, I've worked with Sabrina and certainly, Dr. Marco. They're wonderful resources because it is something, that, Sabrina intersects and we're all on the same floor. So certainly, your volunteers, thank you for serving on this committee. And the voices and the input of what you do is very helpful and very much heard. So thank you for coming out on a Monday night.
Thank you.
And then next up on our agenda, we have, here. I believe we have, oh, there it is. Dr. Marco has an update for us on our public affairs.
And I know Sabrina has this on the screen as well, but I'll give you a paper copy.
Check it out.
How about for presents?
Isn't that sharp? Wouldn't you wear that on a shirt?
Way better than the ear.
So,
We brought in some extra expertise. So you'll see the one on the top, Mr. J provided some feedback on the first one. We then took it back to public affairs, and that is what you'll see the bottom one is the original one, and the one on top is one Mr. J provided input on and resulted in the change.
So my input on this one was really that I loved it. I just looked at the way it was looking at the bottom, like it was kind of swallowing the AC, and you couldn't really see that first C. So I was going to pull it back some and then move the words inside. So that was kind of I thought that's enough.
I
So
have the wrong one up. What's that?
So thoughts? You good with us pushing this forward at this time?
I like it. I think as soon as it flashed up, either one. I like the top one better too. But either one, it struck me as it's kind of like a magnifying glass. So, that was my instant. I'm like, oh, what's the magnifying? Oh, that's a new logo. So I think that's kind of cool because we are looking more in depth at certain things, and I like it. I think it's good.
I think it also looks like a speech bubble.
That's what I think John.
Oh,
yeah.
At the initial attention.
it is, it's art, so it's interpretive, so it's catchy, right?
Yes.
And it's not, there's no overlap. I saw the logo we have in the ear. I saw that in the school on a pamphlet for Hard of Hearing. I was like, oh, that's not.
it's actually right over there on the table.
Is it over there too? Yeah, so I was like, I can't do it.
When I saw it on the table, I thought somebody had already gone ahead and made the other one. So.
So this one here, I think, captures attention. I love the inversion of colors. It fits in line with, but I guess we have to invert it again for the website with Mark a little bit. Because I guess we have to have a secondary version, because on the main website, if you go to our homepage, CPS, I know that they have thumbnails now, it's pretty cool. They have, on our main homepage, they now incorporated a little thumbnail at the top. Yeah, so on the top right.
Wow.
these are not thumbnails we have on. So if you go to our page, where that may be, the white C won't work on this page. So we have to probably invert it for website design. Whatever we put,
Very true.
yeah.
Most logos these days have different versions.
Right, that's my only feedback, is to have an inverted version for the website. So,
I think it would look good. Great, blue,
well,
white letters, triangle blue.
I guess, because it'll have to like, for web development, it's a lot more work to have to like, do that and have the page match it. Just to invert it makes it easier for the website. If they don't do extra work, that's fine. The cheat is to invert the letter.
I think it would look good.
All right, we're good to go.
Yeah, all right. So is there consensus on the logo?
Do we need to vote?
Oh, no, just, I think right here, just about trade, consensus is fine. I feel the nods in the room. We got a logo, so now, tell sure. Thank you, very much. Appreciate it. All right, moving right along. So now we're at, actually, the bylaws. We're actually, the bylaws. So this one, we're in the bylaws pulled up. I think you have a copy in your hand as well. So we're going to go through these. You guys with these? Mine?
So I'm not sure if others have done some homework and looked at comparing the bylaws from some of the other committees. I went through and looked at a couple things, but I'd like to open it first to the committee to ask, were there any things that you found that you thought stood out that needed to be addressed in the bylaw?
I looked at all of them, but I thought for us specifically, things like where it says members will serve a 2-year term, but I feel like some members, Dr. J, serve a 3-year, wasn't that
I think it was
some were
the-
2, some were 3?
We had for the first time members, it's gonna be 3, but we had to have. What was that at?
That is, Article 3, Section 2, members will
Yeah.
serve a 2-year term and may reapply.
3-2, 3. Section 3.
Well, I think because the committee got sort of reinstated, it was gonna be a special situation where some had to overlap, so
Right.
some of the
That was
initial
the one.
reinstatement were gonna be here for 3 years.
Right.
That was it.
So it was on that initial, sort of spreadsheet you had printed out.
Right.
We had to have a stock here.
Mhm.
It just.
Mhm. They just wipe it right out.
That would-
Yeah.
That would make it be counterintuitive.
So I remembered seeing that, and then my other question that I had, obviously, we don't have a chairperson, and our vice chair hasn't come since like the first or second meeting, so I didn't know
Yeah,
what we're all gonna do about that.
most of my suggestions were gonna be around, typically there are vehicles and bylaws like this for the, I had a list at home, I didn't think to print it out, bring it. But to your point, whether it's a member or an officer, a certain amount of absences without notice, or somebody misses a certain amount of meetings, they're recused or removed or whatever, and the seats filled a certain way, and then there was a provision here for the chairperson to call unscheduled meetings. I think there should also be a provision for a certain number of board members to if you have 5 board members or something. It really all depends on whatever fraction. That's why I asked about the roster.
And so the bylaws here were said to be the majority. Some committees do have quorum requirements. What happens is we were finding that there were problems. The committee we met recently had a quorum constraint. It couldn't even be done. They had a quorum constraint. So I think this committee, especially unfortunately, this committee had trouble. I am purpose that this committee, I'm on will to the finish line. This committee across the finish line. Our this committee in general in the past has been in trouble with member staff. And so a quorum requirement, I think, would be different detrimental to progress. So I think that the stated minimal, what was that? The minimal?
So I added a section, again, just some thoughts, that members are expected to attend all meetings. If a member misses and this was exact wording from one of
Uh-huh.
a different committee. If a member misses 50% or more of the scheduled meetings over a 1-year period, their membership may be terminated by the Board of Education on recommendation of a majority of the committee's officers.
Yes.
So that's exact wording from one of the other bylaws. That I just, again, it was a comment for discussion. So if we want to use that exact wording, it's already there. If we want to tweak that wording, again, because with the committee's officers, that's one of the concerns that we have.
I was just gonna
right now.
say, if it has to be recommended,
Might be better.
yeah, because officers, if they're the ones not coming,
Right, I would suggest that you have to elect officers because we don't have any. Okay, so whatever,
Well,
but
Kirk, is the thing. Currently, we do have officers. And they're not present, have not been for some reason, some time. But we do have officers. So we have to go a due process to change over. So I know that I believe it was a meeting and it was a hassle, but we have to honor, without that, we're just ad hoc. So we do this due process that we can go through now to make changes. So that's why we're having this meeting with those changes. So, Sabrina, could you go over like the process for that?
So at Article 5 is elections, and it talks about the elections of officers will take place, it's by show of hands. And then a special election will be held when there is an officer vacancy. It did not specify what vacancy means. At this point, we do not have officers that have provided us with a letter of resignation. So then we're back to the question.
but didn't our chairperson resign completely in person?
No,
I thought we
because
did.
as people would say one thing, but for me, I have to have it in writing. So I had about 3 members resign in writing.
Okay,
So it's in writing.
so though he did it in the room in front of everybody, he's still technically the chairperson.
That was not done in the meeting, that was done, before the meeting started.
Yeah.
That was my record, that was, so that's.
so if there was,
But however, we're having this meeting because we have had officers who were elected who have not shown. Now, that's just our chairperson, our vice chair, and our secretary. Treasurer, secretary.
I think we have
Secretary, vice chair, all of our officers, all 3, have been asked for the last 4 meetings. So that puts the committee at a disadvantage. So right now, what has to happen, we have to look at the bylaws, make amends if needed, and then without question, we have to send out a due notice. Because the people having people on arrest, I mean, I was on my feet.
Right.
So things happen, so we did a due process, say, hey, are you still in? If not, check, kind of like school, yes or no. So I think at this point in time, if I feel this is in a room, we can send out those letters to our members who are not here, say, hey, are you in? Check yes or no. And from there, make those motions, and once that gets, we can take non-feedback as a no. Because again, if you're looking for a connection, it's been several months, and you're asking for it, reach out, and you back, take that as a no. So that's the process. And then we can go from there and change that. We can make recommendations this evening and begin the process of changing the bylaw. We're still in touch with our 4 members who were duly elected and ask them what they wish remain.
I think the first thing to do would be to for any member to say, I've never known it, I've never been a part of anything where it wasn't saying, if you're gonna miss a meeting, you have to give notice in writing. Email's fine. At least 3 days or 48 hours, whatever we want to say, before the meeting to the secretary or one of the executive team. I mean, you can send an email to one person as well as 8, and saying, hi, I'm not going to be there on Monday. That's an excused absence. If you have a total of 3 in a year, or 2, 3, 4 in a year, or 3 consecutive, or whatever it is, that should be construed without any notice as a tacit resignation.
And I agree with you. So I'm hearing from you the suggestion that as we put this in books for changes.
Correct.
And I agree. And this committee was given a role, again, I think part of what's happening here, we're seeing that this committee was not existent. It was not active. So when I joined the board, Dr. Marco and I put up, we met several times and lots of emails, lots of work, and we raised it up. So you guys are here from the effort. So this is kind of this is part of the process. So those things are needed. I think that's a great suggestion. So folks understand to go around and make those suggestions now. You can kind of go through them and tweak them and submit them for a solution.
I agree with his about a certain number of absences, like would mean that you don't want that position, or you don't want, I don't agree with the timeline of saying you're not going to be here. Like, I'm a parent and I'm a teacher. One of us can drop like that. Like, and it's not going to be a 24-hour or 48-hour notice. I did miss one meeting when I got sick. I emailed ahead of time, but I didn't email 24 hours or 48 because I wasn't sick 24 hours or 48 hours ahead of time. So just the time frame.
Something, anything.
Because, you know, anything can come, like, but just notice, like, you need to send an email and say.
And I would say too, we need to define attendance. If
It's
you,
virtual.
can we do a virtual, and will we have a virtual option
Sure.
every time? Does that count? Does that not count? Like sticky situations, certain parts of the county?
Honestly, because that comes down to manpower.
Yeah.
And money. At this time for this committee, and because we're in person, I know it was done for me. Because I was saying, you had it done. I know.
No, I wasn't gonna
No,
say that,
I'm saying,
but-
because I think there's fair.
Yeah.
But it's like, I feel like if we do online, it's really hard to have someone moderate multiple, unless we just meet online in general. And that's a different thing. If you're all online, it's different. So we could look at doing that as well. We do it in person every now and again. And meet that. So I feel like I want to be fair in that regard on how we do online. I also want to make sure that we streamline and don't tax manpower. The thing is, being online as an observer in a classroom, you're listening, you're passive, that's fine. But as a member on a council, you're an active person. When you're active, you have to have your persons log in and check in. Would you say? And say it again and check the comment thread. It's different when you're active as a council member versus when you're just passive as a learner. So
I don't disagree, but I would say, like, my husband travels a lot, and I have 2 kids that are super busy and also can get sick. So, like, if one of them was sick, like sick that I can't leave the house, but I
You
can
can
still
check in, yeah.
participate, I would still like to.
I think if you're
Yeah,
logged
yeah.
in, we have a feed going.
Yeah.
If you're logged in, I think that's present.
I mean, I can watch,
Yeah.
but like, can we?
But if we had officers, including the secretary, that person could perhaps monitor what's happening.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the goal is, to your point, whatever the standards are for notice, either way, we're just trying to clean up or avoid, the bar should be set so low.
Absolutely.
We're just trying to avoid, like you said, so-and-so hasn't been there for 5 months. Okay, well, look, I mean,
They're probably checked out.
Yeah.
So-
Right,
So-
like, can we even simplify what's up there and not recommend anything and have a majority and just say, if you don't come the last 4 in a row.
Yeah, but does it even need to be that specific? I mean, if it's a majority and we can use some common sense around the table and talk about it, hey, this person's been here for 5 meetings. Someone else pipes up and says, well, I got an email from them, or I know the kid was sick that night. I think we should avoid putting such strict terms in writing and leave some wiggle room for interpretation and for our human nature.
We're still evolving, and I also, to the point of, this is a different group than we started with. We started out in a different
Mindset.
pathway or a different mindset, and I think that we've evolved, as the board has evolved, as the superintendent's office has changed, like, we've changed. And so, I mean, a huge change.
Yes.
So I kind of feel like,
For the better, I believe.
100 million% better. I'm super excited about what we're doing. But I think to that point, some people maybe lost engagement that way, or they're like, I don't know what this is, or whatever. So I think, we need to talk about like our communication and how we're engaging. And, if I'm going to miss a meeting, like, yeah, who else is on the committee? Like, you know what I mean? Like, that would be important to know too, I guess.
even if you wanted to say, you missed 3 meetings in a row without any notice being given to anybody. I mean, making the bar so low that you could trip and still go over it. Just like you said, whoever said it, you have the chairman or the vice chairman, whoever, ghosting for 4 meetings in a row. I don't know. I'm just like, otherwise you wind up spending a lot of time figuring out who's, I don't even know. If you told me we had 26 people on the roster, I'd believe you. I have no idea,
So is
but
there a way to change, to be able to vote on new officers, and so not removing them, because Mr. Day, you said like to remove someone from the council, like it's the whole thing, not removing them, but for officers, if they are no-shows for a certain amount of time with no notice, that we can vote on new officers, because we can't really continue to function without officers.
you said it much better than I did. I don't know how you keep showing up and say, Chairman,
Yeah.
Anybody reached out to you?
Well, that's what I was gonna say. Can someone
Huh?
ask him?
Constantly requested have been made. There has been at least 2 times there was expensive, but I think as a chairman, we should be, there should be a presence felt. So I think for all of our members, including our officers, the chairman, the vice chairman, the secretary, I think at least one, we have 3 members who officially resigned, at least 1 or 2, I think, I'm just like in the same boat as our officers. I think we should, council is amenable to this. I think we should send out that, are you with us? And we need, and it's been, X amount of, at this point, it's been at least 3 meetings.
well, to your point though, let's say you send those out tonight. Tomorrow, next Tuesday.
I'm looking for a response, and I think generously, it will at least be 7 days before we start the meeting. So if in the email I send out, if I don't hear back an official yes or a resignation, this will serve as a resignation.
Yeah.
Give me that circle.
I think that, even though it's not established in our bylaws, I think that is due process. And so as a board member, I can go back to the board and say, hey, Roger, you should keep people on bounces from the member. I'm not doing that. It's been due process. So I don't want us people thinking I can't defend.
I think the message should be hopeful though. I mean,
Absolutely. 'Cause
give
we
them
want-
an idea
we
of
want people
what our
to
path is,
join.
what we're doing, and why it's so important that people need to be here. Like you just explained to us, it's not a passive meeting, it's a council.
And it is, I feel like, I'm glad you all stuck it out because you've seen us change and we have evolved from when we started, but we're doing good work. And it's a lot that's been happening. I feel like, look, just in the logo, just that alone, this literally shows from our logo, it's kind of like on track with how we've grown. So I think we're poised to make great strides. And I feel like if they knew where we're doing, where we're going, they didn't be all about it. I think what happens is like somebody growing out their hair, like, they couldn't hang it for the gradient chopped it all. They couldn't hang in the middle. They just stuck with it. I thought they would have been excited as we are.
I respectfully disagree.
You think that-
I respectfully disagree. We've all been a member of committees and clubs and organizations where it's the usual bell curve. And what you're talking about is top of the middle of the bell curve. And those, I agree with you. Oh, you know what? So we are doing this. We're good. Let me get back engaged there. Then you have the slope down the other side. And those people need to clean that with a broom. Because, and I understand it's maybe abrasive. I don't really care. But because when I look around the room, super duper respect for the people that I keep seeing show up. And that's fantastic. It's also really disrespectful to everybody here. I missed several meetings in a row because I just never got any notices. That's on me. I should have, I think I reached out to you and said, is the CAC still on? You said, yeah, we're meeting that. So okay, so we figured that out. But it's not like somebody sitting there going, oh, yeah, I think I was the chairman of that committee. I wonder whatever happened with that. I mean, that's not my vision of leadership, but all great ideas. And I think everybody just wants people to be engaged and positive and want to help. It's like you go into somebody's house for remediation after they had a flood. The first thing you do is get a dumpster in the driveway and just start getting stuff out so you can figure out where you're going.
Right.
That between the bylaws and whatever you're going to write and the great ideas that people have, at least to come back and say, my wife asked me before I came here tonight, well, how many people are on a committee? And I said, I don't know. That didn't make me look too good, but that's why, so I just think starting off reminds me of Nick Saban, something he said at Alabama was the only thing you should need to know to win the game is the rules of the game. After that, everything else is about play. I still don't know who's here. I just don't know what's going on. So whether it's electing officers or something, whenever I do something, I try to take it seriously so that I won't be an embarrassment to myself. If I was going to miss a meeting, I know your email. I mean, this is 2023. If you can't get a hold of somebody, it's because you don't want to get a hold of them. Okay? That's my point, is that first we need to figure out, as you said, are you in or you out? And then we can start saying, okay, you're the chairman, you're this, you're that, whatever, and just go
I think
along.
it'll help us make great strides forward. So I'm totally, I'm into the, council's wishes. So I think at this point in time, I think I'm gonna put action for myself, send out that email that says like, hey, are you gonna be out? I think right now, since we're here, we gotta have that, this is going on. We look at the bylaws and turns out, we have more to look at than just saying, hey, what are the terms for, like, kind of like that longevity. We have to make sure, like before, John said before, we don't scare somebody off.
Oh, don't get me wrong, I'm
So
sorry, I
it should
can't
be-
see,
it should
Lisa,
be a
is that
balance.
here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Lisa, it should be hopeful and progressive and blah, 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 and also saying, and if you are in, based on that hopeful, progressive message, this is how you'll show that.
Right. So I think we need to look at that language and then also consider things like our additional student member. I think it's not in there officially.
So let me
We
go.
had one, we want to put it in the language.
Can I say one more thing about the chairperson and everything? My concern is, I agree with you, sending everyone emails saying, hey, where are all of you? Where you are. But if they show back up and they were the chairperson, they were the vice chair, they were the secretary, who I'm not even sure who that is. If they show back up, the council has changed.
Yeah.
The people who've been showing up have changed. What we're doing has changed and they've missed all of it. So is there some way to, because this is, they get to keep their officer term for one whole year. It's already been 4 months and they haven't been here. Is there a way to reassess who officers are? I'm not saying kick them off the council, because I know you're saying, I totally agree with that. No, they don't need to be kicked off the council, but they are the chairperson and the vice chair and the secretary, and they have no idea what's happening.
Whatever Amanda's saying, I agree with it.
I agree. And
I
along
think
the lines
there's
of discussing attendance, I'm gonna have to excuse myself. I gotta visit 2 of our schools and pick up my kids. So thank you
Thank you
guys
for
so
coming.
much.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you guys.
So that was my question, because it just says officers will serve 1 year term. But we kind of have an extenuating circumstance that when we started this, it was kind of a hot mess. When our first couple meetings, and officers were just kind of like pointed at and chosen, and no one knew where we were going with anything. And then the officers disappeared. We have a direction, we're doing something different.
So I think that something we can look at as well, but I think I want to be careful that we make it to a point where it can fit the terms, needs the council as it evolves.
Right.
The thing is, we just put it hard and fast, something we don't want to write into our bylaws what's good for us right this second.
Mhm.
It should be that kind of like fits the council as it should be that kind of grow. So if we can find language that fits that mold, saying for like officer, if a duly appointed officer, it's for whatever reason found without, providing that said duty, the committee at large can discuss and hold the elections. It's at a point where it's open.
Right, something like that. If they're not performing their duty,
Whether
which would
by,
be,
could be by death, it could be by car accident, it could be by,
Right.
by absence, or just like, extended absence, just no engagement. That happens. So I think
Right.
that effect should be in there. It's fine.
So 2 things about that. If you're gonna know by the next meeting after your emails,
I will.
so that takes care of that pretty cleanly, I think. And then if anybody, I'd be happy to volunteer to really put pen to paper about some of these ideas.
I think at the time we have left, we should really do that now together. I think it's good to have the brain trust on it, but I think what happens is it's more authentic if we're all here. And I know, I forget her name, she's usually here a lot. She's not here today.
Lauren, is it Lauren?
Lauren, she's usually here a lot.
Lindsay too.
Yeah, and so stuff happens, we do like, but I know that we have at least 2 more members who are usually all
Will's usually here.
Yeah, so I think that, I think this might be, for that reason, I like to see this, start now, and we bring it back to the next
Great.
meeting. We kind of finish it up, but I think we should start now. So I hear everybody saying it's like, definitely just start with the elephant and let's eat it up. Officer, appointments, so where we have now, so I need to take what we're talking, what do we have now?
So I'm gonna go back to.
Can you make the font a little bit bigger too? I could be.
Yeah, you would
denied.
just have to go down to the bottom right and blow up the screen if you want.
Yeah, you can do that too, there. Whatever cheap you want to use. That's good right there. That's great. Thank you.
Is that good?
Yep, that's good.
Okay. Okay, so in Article 3, members will be community members. Many of the other committees included high school students enrolled in Frederick County Public Schools. So that's something that was not included in, or was not included in our bylaws. And it's something that stood out when I was reviewing the other committee bylaws
And we have one.
and we have.
We did have, yeah.
And again, would it be beneficial to have more from different perspectives, different feeder patterns?
Right, the racial equity committee had high school students had to be from different schools and a maximum of 3. I wrote down, so.
So, I mean, I think the language for added students is definitely something I fully support. I guess you want to cap it, I guess, so it's not just a student.
Like the high school students vote?
I think
Yeah,
they
they're-
vote.
they're-
So how about just say a maximum membership of X number, which to include no more than 3 high school, whatever, student.
And I like the idea from them being, they had to be from different
Yeah.
feeder patterns,
So,
different.
yeah, no, the little conglomerate, I think, over it.
Yeah, so,
Yeah, we include, that's good.
may include up to 3, from, each from a different,
You can copy this from racial equity article 2 also. Article 2, section 2.
and then the maximum will be 25, including those 3, or 25 plus those 3?
I think about including 3 is fine. Okay. Because 28 is a lot.
And I know this was probably a valiant effort made when forming the committee to try to get all the high school feeder representation, and it was close. I think there was like Brunswick wasn't in.
That is a mainstay in the style of the board. I don't want to see that change.
Yeah, but it's not in here.
It's not in here, okay.
But like also in the racial equity, they had representatives from all feeder
So if
areas
it's not
if
in there,
possible.
let's not add it. See, so I think when the board reaches out to people, the board looks to have representation from around the county. I think
Yeah.
it's important.
I mean,
So-
this committee needs that.
When we applied, it said the board was looking for 2 members from each feeder pattern.
Yeah.
So can we add that?
I'm glad the board said that. I'm, because what happens if we don't get that?
Well, it says representation from all high school feeder areas if possible.
Right,
If possible.
Yeah,
right.
that's
So the
what-
if possible
That I'm
would
fine
be in
with,
there,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, if possible, yes.
What's a community member? Is it,
Could be,
we have to say you're a resident of Frederick County?
community will be the county here. This is the language.
So I would say from all feeder patterns, right? Members will be from.
You can look at the same regulation to get the language.
Well, I don't want to just pull from these directives, these from policies and other ones too. So we should make sure we're with that.
I mean, if somebody lives in Carroll
If
County.
you take it
could
all
they-
out now, it'd be great.
I think we want to keep it vague. They're going to be parents that send their kids to Madison County, right? And if we told a parent they couldn't be on this because they just happen to live across the county border.
Oh, so you could, okay. good,
I mean, if somebody happens to, when they apply, the boards, see the application.
Oh, okay, so they can
And they
turn
have
it
to say
down.
where they're
Oh,
from.
okay.
They say, hey, I'm from Loudoun County. It's like, thank you for your.
Okay,
interest.
gotcha,
You know?
okay.
But,
Thank you.
Okay, that makes sense. I figured since I got in, anybody could get it, so I didn't know they'd turn people down.
It was a meeting, so, is it possible? Okay, that's good.
Do we have any feeling as to like, I know 25 is in there, but what reflection we have as to what the sweet spot of ideal number would be? I mean, 25 is just sitting.
I mean,
Why
I
are
feel
we
like,
talking about
a
it?
sweet spot, I mean, I won't leave it there because I want to stay away. I think, I think that's a great, great selection of new numbers because it could get that big. But, I think what we're probably seeing on the floor is anywhere between 10 and 15.
So I guess there's different schools of thought, but why are we saying 25 if we think a good functioning committee would be 15?
Well, right now, if we had two, each feeder pattern, how many we have? Each high school, how many we have?
only 16, is there 8 high schools are there?
Marco,
They're attending high schools and not CPC.
so that's 20 right there. So I think 25 is
Yeah.
fine.
So maybe there should be a max from high school theaters though?
We have, what do you mean, like 2 from each
So
Well, the nice thing is the
maximum of 2
application
from
process
each. Yeah, they can weed it out that way.
allows that, yeah.
side? Usually-
If 9 people show up from Tuscarora saying,
But is it really helpful to just bring bodies in here when it's 10 people from Tuscarora? Like, should that be part of the policy
that-
or the,
Part of the process. I mean,
that
they're
you
saying-
don't, it doesn't end up stacked just because that's who applied?
I would feel like half of the board would be there.
Okay.
I think we're good there. And I think, like John said earlier, we want to be,
yeah, the meetings help sometimes.
we need to be able to move sometimes. We gotta move over. Because times change, you know, like, by this time or whatever. So members will serve 2-year term to reapply. Can we put some language in there saying like, the whole part, like, exceptions for if, you know, term limits would deplete the council kind of thing? Like our first year here, like say for instance, like if people were in their 2-year term, they're like, all right, 2 years up, you 2 years, you too, it's all of us, okay, we're all gone. Can we have like a maintenance of council?
So like exception could be made for continuance,
Continuity.
yeah, so
For continuity,
Shouldn't that
yes.
be the function of the board? I mean, who appoints, who reviews the applications?
We
There
never
was
voted
no
that.
language
Okay.
in the bylaws that protected against exactly what you're speaking to right now. They were, but they ensured that there was succession. And that it wasn't a new board or a new committee coming on.
Find that. I'm just using my control F. Let's see.
It sounds like frankly something the board should have responsibility for, it seems to me.
Well, in terms of turning over the, well, what I'm saying is that the board, you interviewed and viewed the applications, we're all set. As it were, you are all on your first term. So in 2 years, we had everybody leave.
No, but I think we talked about earlier, there's gonna be some staggering. or something like that. When we were appointed.
If somebody shows up tonight to
Right.
join, then they're gonna be staggered.
Correct.
Yeah.
But I thought we were all initially appointed, there was a staggered list, some on for 2, some for 3, so we're not gonna have that problem. I
Right.
think.
You know.
but does it need to say it in the bylaw so that it's said somewhere that if there's, I guess that's, does it need to say it or does it not need to say
Probably
it?
not. I mean,
That
if people
some
who are
are,
gonna stay on for 3 could always just officially reapply.
Yeah,
Yeah, and-
yeah,
Too many
And the
absences that
roster-
the board can-
and that happens a lot anyway. People will reapply and the board will decide whether to stay on.
And the roster should definitely have a column on it for when the end of each person's term.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
Okay.
so my other question about this section too, and I didn't see it anywhere in here, and I know that Sabrina added the stuff about missing the meets and stuff, and then she added the stuff about, people who resign. What do we do about replacing people who resign? I didn't see that anywhere in here, like if they resign or we
So
just,
that,
no one?
it goes to the, board and to public affairs, we, we'll have to open back up again. I think that would happen if I felt like, if the council felt like, we have another function here, we have more work that we can handle, we need more people.
Isn't recruiting rolling?
No. It's to open up, it's open, it's filled, and then the board, you know, moving forward, usually at term time, we'll open it up again. But if there's like an emergency need, councils have had, the board say, you guys need help, okay, we'll open it back up again. It's kind of like, you know, break glass if needed. So if we have more work to do than we have people to staff, and we're in the middle of term, then we can all call it. Public affairs, it's the whole, put out the press, it's the whole thing. So we always try to break that glass if we need it.
But in theory, at the end of every school year, or just before the end of every school year, the board should put out a new call for the upcoming year for all those members who are board.
For anything that, yeah. So we would have yes next year.
So it is an annual thing.
Should be.
It's in Miami, because like, it's every two terms.
I can never figure out if semi-annual means twice a year or every other year.
At church.
It's, I'm always wrong, whichever I pick. I'm wrong.
5 months.
It's like a USB, no matter which way I
Oh,
stick
yeah.
it in, it's.
It's year one. Year one.
It should be, it'll be every year. Every year you'll have people leaving,
Absolutely.
right? So at about this time, in fact, March is coming up. we should, if we haven't already, we should be asking the board, hey, let's tee up the
There will never be a
Verbiage.
time when it's not needed. I
probably, but we should tee up the verbiage now for the next call for applicants so that we have them by April. They can be decided on by May,
100%.
we're ready to go in the summer.
So.
So you mean
Oh,
to
you know what?
replace the
You know
people
what? I
who,
apologize.
because we all served
No,
2
no,
years.
no. I think I had but you said section 1 year term. Yeah, I thought it was 2 years term. What did I say? What did I
Yeah, it
say?
says in section 2,
In
members
section
serve a
2, 2
2-year term.
years.
Officers.
You're reading
for
all
life.
Officer 1 year
officers,
term, yeah, so
yeah.
for 2 years, we shouldn't be, we shouldn't be required yet.
Well, however, with people leaving, it's still.
Yeah.
Right.
Usually. it's-
So you're saying it was a red glass? You said
No. What I'm
Every
saying
year
is
there's a need to
normally, this is unusual because we're all appointed at the beginning of this current academic year. Normally, every year, every spring, you'll need to issue a new call for new applicants.
That's interesting.
This year, we need to do that as well, because not all 25 of us are still on the board or on the committee, excuse
I
me.
got you.
And so we have to engage the board now.
And then you get the natural
The-
continuity.
The selection process is the safety valve for all of this. If we have 23 members and the rules say you have to open it up every spring, well, you only have 2 spots anyway, so you can admit people as you want. But we practically, we know it's never gonna happen. You're always gonna need people. You know, people dropping out, people dropping dead, people whatever, and so.
I think it would be nice also because that gives the theater patterns not represented a chance to try to get representation. Like we don't have Brunswick. What if this spring someone from Brunswick applies? Then we could have someone from Brunswick.
Well,
And
if somebody
so-
moved into the district last Wednesday,
Right.
they said, well, sorry, John, come back in 2 years, but we'll be ready for you. You know.
I hear you. I listen to the word. Okay. Excellent. So
I mean, maybe nobody will apply.
I've got my action item for action item number 1 is going to be that, hello, how are you? Hello. Second one is going to be ask the board to, so next one down. Okay.
So do we
I
need
think
to
that,
have-
can that language, I guess, so, there as needed possibility to put that on there? That would be feel better, you get it as needed.
And it's just opening applications. It's not saying you have to take anybody.
Yeah,
No, it's-
maybe
it's
there's
just
one
a-
spot.
Right.
So that is, I put this in a word for you, which is actually my word for the year. That is work. So that is not a small lift. So,
You say acceptance of applications is ongoing?
I like the as needed, because I think there'll be a time when like we're full of the gills and people are,
You think you're gonna have a time where this committee's
hey,
focused?
if I'm not hopeful, who am I?
No, I'm not, I'm just saying, but except when you have to, you know. Like I said, the worst case scenario would be somebody says, I'm very interested, I just moved in the area.
Just wait till next year. I mean, like John said, he's right, there's a point where you start the process, and then after that, you need to kind of keep going, because you're 2 years, and you'll be up each time, so.
This, what you're talking about is the public net casting. But in reality, if Dr. Marco moves in next door to me, oh, nice to meet you, you're from Cleveland, and he says, oh, that sounds really interesting, you don't need to do anything, he could, why should he have
The
to?
board has, no, the board has to open the process.
Okay,
They have to fill the application out, it goes to Catherine Rich,
okay,
it goes to the administrative meeting during the board meeting.
okay.
And the board has to review it in board docs. We do closed session on it. It has to be read by every board member, they have to go through, discuss, and read it. So it's a whole thing.
But if you're only doing it every other year,
Yeah, that's fine. I'm just saying, like, we just can't say, hey, come on, jump on. It has to go through a lot of processes.
well, that's fine, then I could say to my neighbor, well, I happen to know for a fact that March they open up every year, so.
Yeah, but you could what if it was an ongoing acceptance of applications, but the review did just happen, so it just goes in the pile?
The full meeting?
Like, and you review it once a year,
Oh, that's a
see,
good idea.
you know, that way,
Pool.
and if someone,
That's not a bad idea. Pool's not bad.
It's like your bench, it's like you have a deep bench. These are interested people.
I think the risk is it's a one-way ticket to frustrating citizens, right? I submit an application in October and I don't hear a damn thing until May. or
Well,
well,
unless
that's
you
not how it
communicate
would
that.
need to be handled.
Like if you said to me, hey,
Hey,
we only
thank
do
you.
it in March,
Right.
let me give you the paperwork, get it all out of the way.
Usually we do ask and then what happens when they apply, if they don't get it, when you tell them, please look up other community meetings. You're right, it's a good way to get them mad, they just sit there and they're just like, you do tell them you didn't do it this time, you're in the pool though for next year, at least to the other committees.
I think we should just do it every spring unless it's needed, unless there's, you know, a big drop off. Because what I really agree with Mr. J is the fact that frankly, it's a lot of work to go through this process, right? So I don't think we want to overburden the board with, you know, every month there's a new application to consider for this council. Right?
But having it in holding, you know, you should be able to submit an application that says right on there, applications are reviewed in March, April of
Because
every
how
year.
easy is it to get applications? It got extended this last time. I didn't hear anything until I heard last email, the application deadline.
And to your point about the labor involved in opening it up to everybody, at least if you knew it was gonna be every April, then you could budget your time for that, so you wouldn't have to worry about it.
Well, then also there's, what's the word? It's an easy word, but like, it's a better word, like, just on par, that's not how the communities run. And what happens is, we're gonna get, committees that we're cannibalizing their candidates. So communities usually run like, you know, when you need it, you ask for it. Just kind of have an open vacuum is not how it usually runs, and so it's like, hey, what about us? You know, so I think that's the problem. And also, I think we run the risk of frustration. Because people, you know, hey, well, this one, apply for it, and you know, I'm gonna put back on that. Yeah, I think the process as is right now, I'm pushing back.
So every 2 years, you're saying?
No, I'm fine with every year. I'm not fine with all year long.
Every year.
I
Yeah,
see what you're saying, because also applicants don't know how many spots there'll be, so they can sit there thinking they're gonna get on it and then find out there was one open spot and their application sat there
And
for a
I
whole year,
guarantee you,
so.
someone will mishear and think they didn't call me, I didn't get it, I know that work, and all that, so
I guess
that's
it's,
unfortunately guaranteed.
it's like the Affordable Care Act, right? I guess you can go enroll during November every year. So whatever, you knew that if it was July and you didn't have health insurance, November 1st, you can go on the portal and sign up.
I
So.
bet you don't know that.
There's a limit to what you can, I mean, yeah, hey, look, you know,
I hear you, but I think that I'm amenable to going forward with the 1 year, just a rolling thing, I'm not. That's me, that's just my.
So that shouldn't say ongoing then, it should say acceptance of applications for membership will be once yearly as
yeah,
needed.
annually.
Okay.
So, it's into the big one, are we there yet? Members, there we go, yeah, number 3, attend all meetings, if members, if this is or more scheduled meetings, for 1 year period, which will be determined by the board of education. Okay, so we're actually almost there at that
Yeah.
point.
Does it say in here when the meetings are? Is that statutorily set down like the first Monday, or is that
No.
not?
Now, those would be like, that's coming to like, you know, this room's availability.
But does it even say the monthly meetings? I think it's somewhere it should say at least they are monthly.
It says monthly,
Okay, all right.
but that's something that we want to discuss.
Yeah, yeah.
That should be ongoing monthly, or we look at
Bi-monthly.
bi-monthly, or do we look at quarterly?
Subcommittees.
And have subcommittees meet to then present at the general, meeting. So there could be some additional work done in between.
That's a good idea.
That's how some of the other committees have been ongoing.
One of the other, of the SEAC bylaws actually mentioned
The time.
meetings in certain months, skipping December and the summer,
Mhm.
which was interesting too.
That's wise, because those are people to that anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people on vacation in the summertime.
Yeah.
And a lot of people on vacation in December, so it's like you know, we had the meeting in December and January because I felt like we didn't say it early enough, so we had it anyway. So people were like, well, I won't be there. Like, I know, we didn't tell you further in advance, still have it. But
I could say that in there, then meetings shall be monthly, with the exception of.
I mean, I want to entertain the bi-monthly comment too, to, you know, and have some committees where you basically put together some work, review a policy, and come back to the monthly bi-monthly meeting and present out what you're working on. I think that would give us some more traction. The other committees that have done that, made some big changes.
Right.
And you're gonna be able to address more policies than if you try to do it as a singular group. If you have those breakout groups, subgroups, then they could be off months, work it and bring back their recommendations.
That's very powerful.
I think I like the idea of going to a subcommittee structure, but frankly, right now, there's not enough of us.
I was just gonna say that there's not enough of
I
us
think we
to
ought
show
to
up.
have and same thing with regard to bi-monthly meetings. I think we ought to put flexibility into the so along the lines of the council may meet on a monthly, bi-monthly, or quarterly schedule, depending upon its workload.
I like that. a lot.
Mhm.
The
That's
council may also create subcommittees, again, depending upon its workload.
I would share the recording, so that's good.
I would shy away from saying which months of the year we're not gonna meet. I think that's a step into the weeds too far. We ought to let that be decided. I'm not a big fan of meeting in December either, but I think that kind of detail is best left to the group to decide,
Fair enough.
instead of writing it in the laws.
Then you just have to make sure that your notification system, if you're gonna hold people accountable for absences, is good enough. But
Fair enough.
But you did what he did.
Part of our bylaws right now, state meeting dates will be announced at the first meeting of each school year and may be altered by a majority vote. However, our current leadership is expecting if you're posting open meetings, that those open meetings are going to continue. And canceling those, adding more is okay. Canceling meetings is something that, again, for transparency, and for public attendance and public knowledge, could be more of an issue.
Right, and to devil's advocate, I agree with the flexibility, but on the flip side, maybe in order to get things done, we should be more firm about when this committee meets, so it happens.
it's nice, it's a lot easier to say in March, we're gonna skip it because of, left-handed person's day, when you know that you're deviating from the set. So
Right.
if you did start off by saying, first Monday of every month, period, and to your point, then the flexibility can come in. I think to what Peter said about the beginning of the school year, it's September, we know, here's our schedule for the year, Monday, skip, Monday. So,
Well, and I like the months in the SEAC because I feel like people won't run out of steam.
Seeing they have a
Seeing,
built-in.
okay, December,
break.
we're not meeting and the summer is off, there could be some subcommittee action that comes up as, deemed necessary by the chairperson, blah, 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 but, even, I know there's not gonna be a complete turnover, right? We've discussed it a million times. We're not gonna just all stop and then have a new committee come in. There'll be continuity. But there's just something to be said for a little piece of firm knowing what to expect. Oh, okay, they meet every month except December and the summer.
nobody's gonna buy your compass if it doesn't have north on
Hmm.
it. Just gotta have something. So I think whatever that is,
That's not a lot. That's not too much to ask. We have to meet that much.
and you're right, but I think you can accommodate both. Just having the bylaw, I think it's probably in there, right? Say meeting announced at the first meeting of school year. Because maybe next year, if we all meet, we'll say, hey, this year we can meet every other month or on Tuesdays or whatever.
Something may come up that we cannot foresee, and maybe we do want to.
Which I think because that wasn't done, that Article 6, Section 1 wasn't done, right? Officially, we should probably also do that once we figure out who's in charge of this.
Well,
There is a list. It's Catherine Rich sent it
she sent it
out.
out, yes.
Okay, good.
There was a list of the people who we had.
There was a while where I
It
wasn't
was
getting.
done a little while ago, yeah. And I haven't seen that again, but after I sent out the little, how are you? So right now, we're at 8:30. So we're at time. And we did not tackle the officer discussion, the language on that one. We want to get to that. So we'll pick this up next meeting at this point.
We also wanted to discuss the time card.
Yes. So staff has to stay later for 7 meetings. Would it be amendment to 16?
I'm fine with 6 p.m.
Wow.
Sounds hard.
This is like bedtime.
I find 6 p.m. meetings to be painful, but if that's the majority, I'll try to attend.
Lisa?
What day is it? The 6th?
It's the 13th.
It's 6:30, be a couple months.
6:30? I'm good with
Is
that.
that easier for you, John?
And we said 7, so like, it was a hard lift, what we can do is, what happens is we're here from staff. They're here from the top of the morning until now, so if we said 7 to you, you guys would start submitting, so I'm glad, except for what I don't know we had in place, that's a hard lift, and you can't do it. What we'll do is they have staff present to us from, like, they call it. So it can be, so that's what we can look at. If 6:30 or 7 is not, 6:30 is fine, you know, to, that, it's not a flex, then 7 people can stay, we just have staff and keep staff.
I mean, Dr. Murphy, you have to stay all day, right? And then all,
You guys have a full day just like me.
well, no, but I mean, I'm just saying, Sabrina, you have to stay
That's the,
all
that's
day.
the marker.
like, Yeah,
That's the marker. So when people who like to come in,
all the people who come in, not the people who come every month. I mean, I'm fine with an earlier meeting, it doesn't bother me.
the marker is like, you know, we're gonna, no, but we do, our staff, they're here in the morning, and they come all along, at the Marco and the teams, and you're getting like, I don't want, you're getting top treatment, because these are like, people are like, they're needing this, yes.
I think we picked 7 because some people who came to the first meeting said that they couldn't get here because of work, but then they haven't come anyway, so.
Our next meeting is March 13th, and then the next one's scheduled, there is no meeting in April.
We're literally on the edge of March, are you kidding?
March 13th is our next meeting, and then May 8th is the final meeting that is scheduled for the year.
So we're at the 50% mark for our meetings. That's kind of already put down for the email.
Not sure if there's one in June.
Well,
I mean, your email to these officers may be,
I mean,
There
you're gonna
is
be out
one
of
in
office. Yeah, your first meeting
June
last year was in May, right? They're already at their 1-year term.
Wow.
Might be a moot point.
Yeah, at this point, I'm gonna meeting. So, no, I mean, I'll still.
Have a good night.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just think before we split, we should maybe say, if none of those people reply to you,
You
that's-
okay?
if all of them reply to you, that's easy, because they show up and that's fine. But if none of them reply to you,
At this point in time, looking at, we're starting our calendars going now. We're at the 50% mark already. It's already in the bylaws, but it's already a.
It's not approved in our, it's not in our.
Oh, what wasn't there, it wasn't there?
That's wording.
Oh, I thought it was already there. Oh.
the bylaws are an advisory document for the officers. It's just a bunch of people hanging around with a notebook.
No.
I can do 6:30.
So I'm hearing 7 still numbers. And we'll have anybody who chimes in to call it.
So it's 7.
Still 7 at this point in time. Thank you. So folks, it's top, next minutes are easy. The next agenda is gonna be bylaws. So next one, and then maybe policy if we get to it.
Well, we have a presentation, we Dr. Marco has scheduled.
Oh, does he? Okay, well, that's gonna happen. And was they pretty fast?
Does it say when the officers are elected?
First meeting of the year, I think it's in there.
Thank you all so much for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your dedication. I appreciate you very, very much.
Thanks.
You're making great strides. It's gonna make a big difference. You watch. I can feel it. It's already happening. Look at our logo. Remember our logo? See what we're.
Logo looks great.
Yes.